Acts 10 1-48, through the Bible. Chapter 10. Theme: Conversion of Cornelius, the Roman centurion, son of Japheth. Chapter 10 continues the record of the ministry of Simon Peter. Later, Peter will pass from the scene, and the history will continue with the ministry of the Apostle Paul. Although Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles, Peter opened the door to the Gentiles by entering the home of Cornelius and presenting salvation through Christ to his household. Cornelius' vision. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band called the Italian band, Acts 10:1. Remember that Paul had been in Caesarea, Acts 9:30, and probably some of the other apostles had been preaching the gospel along the coast. Tel Aviv is really a part of Old Joppa. As one travels up the coast from Joppa, the next place of any size is Caesarea, which was really a Roman city. It was the place where Pilate lived. The governor, and those who ruled the land stayed there. This is where Cornelius was stationed. He was a centurion, which means he was a commander of 100 soldiers in the Roman army. The Italian band was a cohort of Roman soldiers recruited in Italy. A devout man, and one that feared God with all his house, which gave much alms to the people, and prayed to God alway, Acts 10:2. He was a devout man. That means his worship was rightly directed. He recognized his dependence upon that which is divine. Remember, that even a pagan can have devotion, and a deep conviction to his gods. Sometimes, we wish that Christians today had more devotion and conviction. He was a devout man, and one that feared God. He was not a Jewish proselyte, in the strict sense of the term, but gravitated toward Judaism, and could be called a proselyte of the gate. Today, we might say that he was a man who lived in the neighborhood, attended church on special occasions, was friendly toward the church, but was not actually a Christian. That could have been Cornelius. He feared God. He gave much alms to the people, means he gave many gifts of charity to the Jewish people. The nation Israel has always laid great stress upon giving. God had taught them this in the Old Testament. We speak of the tithe, but it is obvious from the Mosaic system that they actually gave 3/10. They gave for the running of the government, which was a theocracy at the beginning, they gave for the maintenance of the temple, and they gave 1/10 of all that they produced. So, they have been giving, generous people. It is interesting, that even today, many of our eleemosynary, that is, charitable foundations, were established by Jews. There is no group of people in our day, that gives as generously as does the Jewish community, in its support of the nation of Israel. They are very generous people. Cornelius prayed to God alway. This centurion took his needs to God. He needed to have more light. He wanted it. He probably didn't really know too much about prayer, but he prayed. He saw in a vision, evidently about the 9th hour of the day, an angel of God coming into him, and saying unto him, Cornelius, Acts 10:3. This centurion was an officer in the Roman army, a career officer, and a man of influence. Also, he had a tremendous influence on his own household, as we shall see. He was a good man to all outward observation. In America today, he would pass for a Christian of the highest degree, an outstanding man. But, he actually was not a Christian. He had not even heard the gospel. He is an example of a man who lived up to the light which he had. John 1:9 says this of Jesus, that was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. This centurion had not met Jesus Christ, nor come into his presence, but he was living up to the light that he had. Paul is referring to those who do not live by the light they have, in Romans 1:19-20, because that which may be known of God, is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world, are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. This is God's answer to that oft-repeated question, what about the poor pagan, that good heathen, who wants to know God, but never had a chance? Is he lost? The answer is, that God will get light to such a person. God will enable him to hear the gospel. Now, how will God get the gospel to Cornelius? The barriers seem insurmountable. The church at this time, and for the first 8 years, was exclusively Jewish. These Christian Jews were still going to the temple, and observing many Jewish customs. They could do that under grace, because they were trusting Christ. Then, the gospel broke over into Samaria. The Jews in Jerusalem were surprised, but they recognized the hand of God in this. Now, how is God going to open the door of the gospel to the Gentiles? Paul is to be the great missionary to the Gentiles, but God has Paul out in the desert in Arabia, training him there. It is Simon Peter, who must open the door to the Gentiles. God used perhaps the most prejudiced and religious bigot, the greatest extremist of the day. Obviously, the Holy Spirit directed every move, in getting the gospel to the Gentiles. My friend, all genuine Christian work is directed by the Holy Spirit. No other work amounts to anything. The Holy Spirit had to work in the heart of the Gentile, the Holy Spirit had to work in the heart of the Jew. The Holy Spirit directed the bringing of the gospel to the Gentile world. And when he looked on him, he was afraid, and said, "What is it, Lord?" And he said unto him, "Thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before God." Acts 10:4. An angel of God appeared to Cornelius in a vision. He was not dreaming, but was given this vision while he was praying. Now, I do want you to notice, that there are certain things that do count before God. These are things that can in no way merit salvation, but they are things that God notes. The prayers of Cornelius, and his alms, had come up for a memorial before God, and God brought the gospel to him. Wherever there is a man, who seeks after God as Cornelius did, that man is going to hear the gospel of the grace of God. God will see that he gets it. And now send men to Joppa, and call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. He lodgeth with one Simon a tanner, whose house is by the seaside. He shall tell thee what thou oughtest to do. Acts 10:5-6. The angel tells him where to find Peter. He doesn't need more of an address. The odor of those hides down in that vat will lead them to the right place. And when the angel which spake unto Cornelius was departed, he called 2 of his household servants, and a devout soldier of them that waited on him continually, and when he had declared all these things unto them, he sent them to Joppa. Acts 10:7-8. These men won't have any trouble finding the tanner's house. While they are on their way, God must prepare Simon Peter. Peter's vision. On the morrow, as they went on their journey, and drew nigh unto the city, Peter went up upon the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. Acts 10:9. It is absolutely necessary for God to prepare Simon Peter. You see, Simon Peter didn't have the breadth that Paul had. Although he didn't have the background or the training that Paul had, God can use him differently. I believe it is a tremendous mistake, to think that every person has to be poured into the same mold, for God to use him. And he became very hungry, and would have eaten, but while they made ready, he fell into a trance, and saw heaven opened, and a certain vessel descending unto him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the 4 corners, and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of 4-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. Acts 10:10-12. Notice, that there were beasts, all kinds of birds, and all kinds of bugs. And there came a voice to him, "Rise, Peter, kill, and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." Acts 10:13-14. While Peter is wondering what this means, a voice speaks to him. Isn't it interesting that he calls him Lord, but he doesn't obey what the Lord tells him to do? Now, don't miss this. Here is a man who is on this side of the day of Pentecost. He is living in this age of grace, when it makes no difference, whether we eat meat or whether we don't eat meat. However, Peter is still abiding by the Mosaic system, and he is not eating anything that is ceremonially unclean. He is sincere and honest about it. Someone may say, that he ought to be broad-minded, and eat everything. Well, you see, that the Lord is teaching him, that he is no longer under the Mosaic system, and is free to eat anything. Today, the big problem, is that some people decide, they don't want to eat meat, and then they try to put everyone else, under that same system. My friend, under grace, you can eat meat, or not eat meat. That is your business. Eating some certain food may give you indigestion, but it certainly will not change your relationship with the Lord. And the voice spake unto him again, the second time, What God hath cleansed, that call not thou common. Acts 10:15. What God has made clean, don't you call unclean. You can eat anything, because God has said so. This was done thrice, and the vessel was received up again into heaven. Acts 10:16. Peter was left wondering, what it was all about. Now, while Peter doubted in himself, what this vision which he had seen should mean, behold, the men which were sent from Cornelius, had made inquiry for Simon's house, and stood before the gate, and called, and asked whether Simon, which was surnamed Peter, were lodged there. While Peter thought on the vision, the Spirit said unto him, Behold, 3 men seek thee. Arise therefore, and get thee down, and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. Then Peter went down to the men, which were sent unto him, from Cornelius, and said, Behold, I am he whom ye seek. What is the cause, wherefore ye are come? And they said, Cornelius the centurion, a just man, and one that feareth God, and of good report among all the nation of the Jews, was warned from God by an holy angel, to send for thee into his house, and to hear words of thee. Acts 10:17-22. Simon Peter is to go to Caesarea. This little delegation from Cornelius gives an explanation to him, then extends an invitation to come with them to the house of Cornelius.